I'll start in the meantime. All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. The mic will be on in just a moment. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Shvat, Mel and Karen Ram, in honor of their friends David Avram ben Yaakov Yosef Halevi, Yitzchak Zalman ben Shmuel David, for joining our daf shir and for remaining committed through some of the hardest mesechtos. We look forward to dancing together with them at the Siyum Hashas. So beautiful, still beautiful. Our day of learning sponsors, even Mark Eiler, on the 20th yard site of Eve's father, Yaakov Beryl ben Chaim Zichron Lebracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Neshama will have an aliyah, the family a nechama, and a merit Hashem. Simchas and Besoros Tovos for all of Klal Yisrael. Rabbi, it is a great Zuchos Baruch Hashem to begin another week of Mesachas Menachos together. A tremendous chayk to Rabbi Josh for giving shir yesterday. We are going to pick up in Meretz Hashem today at the Mishnah on Chof Ches Amud Aleph 28a, and an exciting Mishnah it is. Really, a couple of days, some great sugyas, some agadata, yeah, you heard it, some agadata, some incredible halacha. But again, don't give me any u's and ahs, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Agadatas, halachas, it's all u, it's all ah, and it's all absolutely incredible. Best daf ever. Says the Mishnah, Shiva Kana Menorah. So we're actually totally departing from Menachos for a little bit of time to focus on some other areas of, what was that? Somebody make a comment over there? Keep it down. All right, so this is a soliloquy. All right, so the Mishnah says as follows. So Shiva Kana Menorah Ma'akvin Zed. Literally, again, the 7 branches of the menorah are ma'akiv each other. Now, again, I will say, one of the exciting things we're going to do really in tomorrow's daf is we're going to go through the menorah in the Mishkan, then later on in the Beis HaMikdash, piece by piece. We're also going to talk a little bit about the actual shape of the menorah, which is a tremendous machlokes amongst the commentaries. Tremendous machlokes, which we'll get into tomorrow. But for our purposes today, suffice it to say, the menorah had 7 branches. 7 branches. So just to understand the way it was structured is, they will call it the middle part of the menorah, essentially extended upwards. That was branch number 1. And then 3 more additional branches on each side. Again, tomorrow we're going to have images. We'll go through all of that. Point that the Mishnah is making is you need all 7 branches. Right? If you're missing one, it compromises the entirety of the menorah. Take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Sheva kana menorah, kedichsir v'shisha kana yotzim mitzidel, v'amenorah atzma sheva emtza hi hashviyas. Because the pasuk itself says that there has to be 6 additional branches, and like I said, the middle base extended upwards to form one of the branches. Next, Shiva neroseh ma'akvin zeh. The menorah had, and I will say, we'll call it, I'm not going to translate neroseh as candles, because of course the menorah didn't have candles, but rather ner means more effectively like a lamp. So we're going to discuss that at the top of each branch, there was a receptacle in which oil was held. You need all 7 of those receptacles for the menorah to be effective. Rashi says, Barosh kol kana v'kana hayaner echad ke'ein bazach, V'sham nostin hashemen v'apsilos. So at the top of every branch, there was a receptacle. Inside of that receptacle, you would put the oil and the wicks. You need all of them. If you're missing any of them, the menorah is compromised. Similarly, shtei parshos sheva mezuzah ma'akvos zuazu. The 2 parshios that go into a Torah scroll, Shema and V'haya'im Shamoah, the mezuzah, need to be there. And if you're missing either of the parshios, ultimately, again, the mezuzah is invalid. Not only that, afilu ksav echa ma'akvan. Even if any of the parshios is missing 1 letter, that compromises the kashrus of the menorah, of the mezuzah, and the mezuzah will be unkosher. Similarly, dalet parsha shebetfilin. The tefillin itself has 4 parshios that are written inside of it. If you look at Rashi says, Dalit Parsha Shebetfilin, Shema, V'haya'im Shamoah, Kadesh Likal B'char, V'haya Kiviyacha. So we'll get into all of this in the Gemara, but tefillin has 4 parashios, ma'akvin zuadzu. If you are missing any of the parashios, it undermines the effectiveness of the tefillin. Afilu kasav ksav echa ma'akvin. Not only that, even if any of the parashios is missing 1 letter, ultimately, again, the tefillin is not going to be good. Dalit tios ma'akvos zuazu. Tzitzis has 4 corners. On each corner, again, there are sets of strings. They are ma'akiv each other. Sheba arba'asan mitzvah achos. because the Tanna Kama says all 4 of the strings of the tzitzis represent one mitzvah. In other words, you might have thought that maybe each corner is its own mitzvah. So therefore, even if you don't have 4, okay, 3 is still good, 2 is good. Tanna Kama says, no, not true. All 4 are really 1. Interesting enough, we'll say on this last point, Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Arba Asan, Arba Mitzvahs. So Rabbi Shmuel ultimately holds that, no, interestingly enough, all 4 corners are 4 separate mitzvahs. But what's the nafkamina? What's the nafkamina? Nafkamina is if you're missing 1 corner. If you're missing, let's say I only have enough strings to make 3 corners of tzitzis. Should I have the tzitzis or not? According to Tanna Kama, it's either 4 or bust, right? 4 or nothing, right? According to Rabbi Shmuel, each corner will be its own independent mitzvah. So we'll say the Mishnah teaches us a tremendous Moser Haskell. There are times in life where you could apply the concept that it's the effort that counts, not the results. Right? As long as I put in the maximum effort, that in and of itself is success. And again, whether or not I achieve the desired results, that sometimes it's not in my control. And then there are other times in life where it's all about the results. It's all about the results. And trying is simply not enough. You have to produce. And if you don't produce at the end of the day, it's a failure. And I will say, knowing kind of which fits into which category. And for ourselves, like what are the things in life where I say to myself, you know what, my avoda here is to try. Whatever I do or I don't produce, that's not in my control. And what are the things in life where no, I need to produce. There is no trying. There is only success. And if the results materialize, I'm a success. If the results don't materialize, I'm a failure. Not like I'm a failure, like in life. But again, I have to own the fact that I have failed. So the Mishnah tells us there are areas of life where effort is not enough. You must produce results. Incredible, incredible, says the Gemara. And I will say, by the way, you should just know, sometimes that attitude is the difference between success and failure in life. You know, we mentioned this many, many times, that there are times in life where you could tell you're going to fail at something. How? If you introduce the initiative with 3 words. I will try. I will try. More often than not, if we're honest with ourselves, I will try is cover. It's like a smoke screen for, I'm really not putting maximum effort into this, right? I have very little intention of actually following through, but I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that. It's kind of like Gamzela Tova, right? What's Gamzela Tova? Gamzela Tova is like what you say when you want to sound frum, but you're profoundly unhappy about anything and everything in life, right? So again, at the end, I will try. I will try. It's like, I'm going to try. I'm going to try. Even the way we say it sometimes, yeah, I'm going to like that with a little bit like that wine, that kracht, and I'm going to try. Again, sometimes you just have to be honest with ourselves. There are times in life where, again, I can't control the outcome. And all I can do is literally see I'm putting in maximum effort. But there's a lot of stuff in life that we do control the outcome. We do control the results, and failure cannot be an option, because if the results don't materialize, I have failed. Knowing which life initiatives fit into which bucket is the key to success, says the Gemara. My timer. So you can tell already, by the way, just in the Mishnah. Exciting, no? No? And incredible. Incredible. I like this. Thank you. Right? So, listen, I'm just saying, first of all, okay, I'll say it. It is nice to have in this island of Kachim, like a little bit of non-Kachim, so this is like day-to-day mitzvahs. So this is really an exciting sugya ahead of us. Says the Gemara, my timer. And by the way, there's no Zav on today's daf either. I just also wanted to point that out. I know for some of you that's a disappointment, right? But Lamaisa. So again, no Kachim, no Zav. So this is mamish like okay, day-to-day mitzvahs. It's incredible. Says the Gemara, my timer. So what's the reason the Gemara says that you require the 7 branches of the menorah, that they're ma'akev? In other words, so again, the fact that there have to be 7 branches of the menorah, that we know, that's a pasuk. That's a pasuk. The shaila is, how do I know that it's ma'akev? That if I don't have any of the branches, if I'm missing anything, that the menorah itself is fundamentally compromised. So the Gemara says, Havia ksibuhu, because the pasuk says Havia. Now, when it says Havia, it says Yihiyu. The pasuk that the Gemara is quoting, so we're actually going to have it 2 weeks. 2 weeks, the Parashat Truma, we're going to have it in Meretz Hashem. So it says, V'asisa menoras zahav tar, miksha te'asya menorah, yirecha v'kana, geviyah v'kaftira pracha, mimena yihiyu. Yihiyu. Now, we've seen this many times throughout our journeys in Shas. Whenever you say a lashon of yihiyu means what? It's gotta be this way, and there is no exception. In other words, it has to be this way, and failure to comply with all of the details, by definition, fundamentally undermines the kashrus of the item. So therefore, it says yihiyu by the menorah, which means you have to have all 7 branches. Menorah haisa ba'a mina eshes umina zahav. So the menorah was made mina eshes. Rashi says eshes means asiyasa chaticha shlema umaka b'kornus ad shiyetz umimena kol kela. There's another word we usually use for eshes, which is miksha. Miksha means Rabbi said that the menorah, this is incredible, the menorah was fashioned out of a block of gold. In other words, if you were making a menorah, we would assume, how would you make a menorah? Take a bunch of gold and fuse together multiple pieces. Amazingly enough, that is not how the menorah was made. The menorah ultimately, again, was made for, you took a solid block of gold and they hammered the menorah out ultimately from that solid block of gold. They both say, what's the pshat? Why does the menorah have to be miksha? So perhaps, and there's many different insights, but perhaps an idea is like this. The menorah, remember again, this is for the Mishkan initially, represented the foundation of Jewish connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? The Mishkan itself was the address in Olam Hazeh to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not just the menorah. A lot of the kingdom had to be miksha. What's the difference between when you make a utensil miksha versus when you fuse it together with different pieces? What's the difference in the craftsmanship? Seams. Right? Whenever you go ahead and you craft things from different pieces, it's always going to be some amount of seam. That's the way it works. Miksha, there's no seam. It's seamless. In a foundation of a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's got to be seamless. My life isn't going to be seamless, and going forward, it's not going to be seamless. But the foundation has to be seamless. When we create a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at its core, at its very inception, by the way, it's the same thing with the foundation on the house, right? If your foundation of your house is not waterproof, right? If I'm saying anything incorrect over here, right? If it's not waterproof, or it's right, or there's stuff that allows the moisture to get in, then ultimately, again, you're done. You could go ahead and take certain liberties and scale back the quality on certain finishes, right? You don't have to use the nicest windows. You don't have to use the nicest stone. You don't have to use the best roof. You can still make a great house. But if that foundation is not watertight, if it's not seamless, your structure is doomed over time. The Mishkan, the fabrication of the utensils in the Mishkan represented the inception of our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At the core, there has to be ironclad emunah. There has to be seamless emunah. There has to be a complete connection. There could be a lot of flaws and a lot of shortcuts in the rest of the structure. But the foundation, the menorah, the kalim, have to be seamless. Incredible. So the menorah has to be mina eshes mina zav, gold. So from one block of gold and from gold. Asamina grutos psula. And what's like grutos, Rashi points out over here, are gold pieces. If you made the menorah from gold pieces, the menorah is possible. Mishamine matachos kshera. Now, interestingly enough, if you made the menorah from other metals, the menorah is going to be kosher. So this is actually pretty incredible that we're going to have to talk about a little bit more. So the Gemara says, okay, so now here's what's interesting. The Brisa, like the Brisa said the menorah has to come from one solid block of gold and it has to be gold. Yet then the menorah said, if you made the Brisa said, if you made the menorah from pieces of gold, it's puzzle. But yet, if you made it from other materials, other metals, it's kosher. So the Gemara says, why is that? Why is it that if you make it out of pieces of gold, it's possible? The chsiv, miksha v'havia. Because the Torah says two things, miksha, which means it has to be a solid piece, and havia. What's havia? Yihiyu means it's got to be this way, and there is no room for any deviation. I have the Gemara says, 1 second. Shamine matachos, nami zavavia. Amakra, right? Zavavia. But again, by other metals, it also says, the pasuk says zav, the menorah has to be gold, and yihiyu. It also uses lashon of yihiyu by gold as well. So wouldn't that tell you that a dafka has to be gold and nothing else? Amakra te'aseh. The pasuk says te'aseh shall be fashioned l'rabos shar mine matachos. This comes to include ultimately again other forms of metal. So again, I say, interestingly enough, what the Gemara is saying over here is when you're making it out of gold, it's got to be out of one block of gold. But apparently, if you don't have gold, you can make it out of other metals as well. The ema, the rabos grutos. Maybe this comes to include other, even pieces of gold, not a whole block of gold. To which the Gemara says, "Lo sagadaitcha da'amiksha ksiva havia." Now, because interestingly enough, the word Yehiyu is written really on the heels of miksha, which means that it has to be one solid piece. Te'asa nami amiksha ksiv, but te'asa is also written on miksha. Miksha la'akev. So ultimately, the pasuk says miksha. It says miksha twice to teach me that what? It has to be made, has to be fashioned out of a solid block of gold, cannot be made out of pieces. Zahav, nami le'akev, but it says gold twice also. So maybe saying gold twice should tell you that ultimately it has to be gold and nothing else. To which the Gemara says, Haimai, so we'll say, if you would say like this, that if you make the menorah out of pieces of gold, meaning not a slab, not a block, but pieces, it's pasul. But from other forms of metal, it's kasher. Hainu zahav miksha l'drasha. Then I'm going to say that makes sense. Then zahav twice teaches that it has to be gold, and when it's gold, it's got to come from a solid block. In other words, what the Gemara is suggesting is maybe the block obligation is tethered to gold. So when you're making the menorah out of gold, it's got to be a solid block. But if it's not gold, because there seems to be a license to use other materials, other metals, then ultimately, again, it doesn't have to be a solid block. But if you say that it could even be from pieces of gold, then other forms of metal will be possible. Then what do you do with the double lashon of zahav, and what do you do with the double lashon of miksha? To which the Gemara says, "My darsha tisanya." I'll tell you what we do with it. Listen to this. Kikar zahav tar ye'ase osa. So the pasuk says, out of a kikar of pure gold you shall make it, eskala kele ma'ela, all of these utensils. So the Gemara says, ha'ela, when it says these, so the Gemara says, ba zahav ba kikar, ena ba zahav, ena ba kikar. So we'll say, this is a very important line. So therefore the Gemara is teaching me is like this. When you are fashioning the menorah out of gold, then there is the obligation of kikar. Now, kikar is the weight. That's the weight of gold that you're using. If you're not using gold, then ultimately, again, there's not a weight obligation. So we'll say, what you begin to see over here, we're going to flesh this out a little bit more, but you begin to see over here something very interesting, that ideally, the menorah really has three qualities, more than three, but for our purposes right now, three. Number one, zav, gold. Number two, miksha, made out of a solid block. And number three, kikar, it has a defined weight. What the Gemara now seems to be indicating is those three halachos are connected, and they're all triggered by the use of gold. So when there is gold, then again, gold triggers miksha, which goes ahead and triggers kikar. But interestingly enough, if it's not gold, and we'll talk about the license not to use gold, then perhaps these other obligations do not apply. Givi'ah, kaftorah, u'parachaha. We'll say these are the parts of the menorah, which we'll discuss in greater depth later on. So giviyah are literally, again, the cups. Those are the receptacles on top that hold the oil. Kaf torah is literally like a kaftor is literally like a button, but we'll see what form it is. Uprachaha and the flowers. So giviyah and prachaha, these are the more ornamental parts of the menorah underneath the oil receptacle. So ba zahav, ba gvim kaftorim uprachim. So same idea. If you're fashioning the menorah out of gold, so the gold obligation triggers gvim, kaftorim, and prachim. Eino ba zav, on the other hand, if you're not making the menorah out of gold, eino ba gvim, kaftorim, uprachim. Then ultimately, again, then there is no obligation to go ahead and bring or furnish these other parts of the menorah. So both sides, this is fascinating. So what you begin to see, so these are more details about the menorah. So the menorah has to have geviyim, which are the receptacles. Kaftor, parach are the ornamental parts. The ornamental parts of the menorah are only triggered by the use of gold. So if it's gold, then you have to build these other things. If it's not gold, I don't need the same level of ornamentation. Ve'imanami ba zav ba kanim, ena ba zav ena ba kanim. So 1 second. If that's the case, now this is really interesting. So what we're beginning to see is when the menorah is made out of gold, So gold triggers all of these additional obligations. Number one, miksha, right? It has to be hammered out of a block. Number two, it's got to be kikar. It has to have a certain weight. Number three, or we'll call it three, is gvia, kaftora, upracha. It has to have specific ornamentation. If you're not using gold, these same obligations do not apply. The Gemara says, well, if that's the case, why don't we say like this? When you're using gold, that's when you have to have the branches of the menorah. Maybe if you're not using gold, there's not an obligation of the branches. To which the Gemara says, Ve'ema nami ba'zav ba'kanim. Ena ba'zav, ena ba'kanim. If you're using gold, then you have an obligation for the branches. If you're not using gold, maybe there's an obligation for the branches. Hahu pamat mikri. Here's the problem. A menorah without branches is not called the menorah. What is it called? Pamat lurim is like a candelabra or a lantern. It's just not called a menorah. By definition, a menorah is a multi-branched utensil. So without the branches, ultimately, again, it's not going to be called a menorah. So we'll say, so really, by the way, so this is really interesting. So almost like two models of the menorah. If the menorah is made out of gold, you have all these obligations. It sounds like if it's not made out of gold, you don't have the obligation. Now, the only obligation that seems to apply, no matter what the metal is the branch obligations. You always got to have 7 branches. But the other details that are unique to gold would not necessarily apply to other metals. Incredible. The Gemara goes weiter. V'zeh ma'isa menorah miksha zav. So again, the pasuk says this is the process for the menorah. Miksha zav. Now again, miksha means it comes from a block of gold. And we'll say, here is the line. Ba zav, ba miksha. Eina ba zav, eina ba miksha. So again, we begin to see that it is gold that drives all of these other details. So if you're fashioning the menorah out of gold, then there's an obligation of miksha coming out of a block of metal. If it's not gold, then there's not the obligation of miksha. To which the Gemara says, miksha d'seifa l'mayasa, but miksha is mentioned the second time in the pasuk. What does that come to teach me? L'me'ute chatzotzros. Ooh, very interesting. This comes to exclude the trumpets. And again, I will say, interestingly enough, these were the trumpets of Moshe Rabbeinu. We're going to discuss in just a moment. The Sanya, here we go. Chatzotzros hayuba'im min ha'eshes min ha'kasef. The trumpets of Moshe Rabbeinu came eshes. And again, I will say, eshes means a solid block of material. In this case, it wasn't gold, but rather it was silver. It was silver. So we'll say, so it had to come from a solid block, fashioned out block, and it was silver. Va'asam min ha'grutos ksherim mishamin ematachos psulim. Sheba said it's very interesting. This is like the opposite of the menorah a little bit. So interestingly enough, if you made the chatzotros ultimately again out of pieces of silver, it's kosher. But if you made it out of a material other than silver, it was pasul. Why is it that if you made the trumpets out of other materials, it's pasul? Kesef v'havia. Because we'll say once again, it's kesef and yihiyu, right? It's because the lashon of the pasuk is kesef, it's silver, and yihiyu, which means it has to be silver, nothing else. But I don't say if that's the case, then why should you be able to fashion it out of pieces of silver? After all, the Gemara says miksha v'havia. The pasuk says miksha, it has to be out of a complete piece, and havia, and it says ultimately again yihiyu. To which the Gemara says mi'et rachmana gabe menorah mikshahi v'lo chatzostros. So ultimately, I will say there's a miyot. The Torah Dafka says that by menorah mikshahi, it has to be miksha. In other words, menorah is the only, well, not the only one, but menorah is the utensil that must be made out of miksha, but other utensils don't have to be. So I will say, so just hold cup on this, because we're going to come back to all of this. But the chatzosros, now the Mishnah is saying is, ideal way to fashion chatzosros, ideal way to fashion the trumpets is block of silver, so one fashion out of one block, and silver. By chatzosros, even if you make it out of pieces of silver, it's going to be kosher, but it must be silver. It can't be any other material. So let's analyze. So we'll say we learned in the Brayso, Kol HaKelim Amud Beis. This is incredible. Kol HaKelim Sha'asa Moshe Ksherim Lo Uksherim Ledoros. All of the utensils that Moshe Rabbeinu fashioned, this is for the Mishkan, anything he fashioned for the Mishkan, ultimately again is Ksherim Lo, is kosher for him, and also good for future generations. Chatzosros, over the trumpets, Ksheros Lo, Upsulos Ledoros. But ultimately, again, the Chatzosros that Moshe Rabbeinu made, those were unique for him. unique for him. They were not usable in any future generations. The Gemara says, Chatzos my time. Well, what's the reason? Why are the trumpets that Moshe Rabbeinu made only good for him and not for future generations? Ilema da Amakra Aseh Lecha. Because remember, the pasuk is Aseh Lecha Shtei Chatzos Kesef Miksha Te'asa Osam. So maybe because it says Aseh Lecha, make for you. So maybe these are dafka for Moshe, not for future use. So the Gemara says Lecha V'lo Doros. Is that true? Elameata. If that's the case, the pasuk also says V'asisa Lecha Aron Eitz. Let's say the pasuk says by the Aron, right? By the Aron, by the actual ark itself. It says to Moshe, make for yourself an Aron Eitz, a wood Aron. Are we to say Hachanami Delacha V'lo Doros? Is that this? That's also only for Moshe Rabbeinu and not for future generations. To which the Gemara says, now what I will point out, by the way, is that Aron that the pasuk is talking about is that Moshe Rabbeinu goes ahead and goes up and gets the second set of luchos. So remember again, there's a whole discussion in general about the chronology of the Mishkan, right? How exactly the Mishkan happened, when it happened, in response to what. But I just want to point out that interestingly enough, this is about the fact, it says, V'asisa lecha Aron Eitz. This is about an Aron in which to go ahead and put the second set of luchos. But again, we'll circle back to that detail as well. The idea over here is, so what does that mean? If you're going to say Aseh lecha means Moshe, it's only for you and not for any future use, and that's why you're saying the Chatzotros can't be used for future use. What about this Aron? So it could very well be that we'll say that by the Aron, the obligation ultimately again was for Moshe Rabbeinu to use his own money. That interestingly enough, that the money for the Aron had to come from Moshe Rabbeinu. Or the other possibility is no, it came from communal funds, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu almost kiviyachal said to Moshe Rabbeinu, I'm making it as if it's from your money, because I desire yours more than I desire the klals. Okay, so we'll circle back to that. To which the Gemara says, "Hay nami mi boy lehachi shiny hasan the amakra lecha trezimni aseh lecha v'hayu lecha." It's also possible that by the Chatzotros it says aseh lecha twice. And therefore, again, that repetition of lecha indicates to us that the Chatzotros dafka have to come from, or they belong to Moshe, used during the leadership reign of Moshe Rabbeinu, but were not permitted to be used later on. So just a word about this. We're going to come back to the Aron, right? Because the Aron, we're going to have to see exactly what this means. Is it true the Aron ultimately came from Moshe Rabbeinu's money, not from anyone else's money? It certainly doesn't seem to be that way in the pasuk. So we're going to circle back, but I want to close out on the Chatzotros, and this is incredibly important. The Chatzotros, Rabbosai, were unique by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu had a very unique identity in that he was the Navi and he was also a Melech. He really had both of these identities. In certain respects, Moshe Rabbeinu was the first king over Klal Yisrael. The Chatzotros represented, to a certain degree, his control over the people. Because what were the Chatzotros used for? So generally, Chatzotros were used as like a call to war. For Moshe Rabbeinu, the Chatzotros were also used as a call to gather the people. As a result, the trumpets of Moshe served a different purpose than the Chatzotros for future generations. So because that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says ultimately again that Moshe, those Chatzotros, those are your Chatzotros. No one else in the future could use it. And I will say, this is very important because there's a tremendous din in leadership over here as well. A lot of times, I will say, we started here in the shul. This is now the third week, a Nach Chabura. If you're not part of it, I would strongly encourage you to join it. It's self-study. It's four chapters of Navi a week. It's easy. We're now starting today is the beginning of week number 3, which is chapters 9 through 12 in Sefer Yoshua. There's a WhatsApp group, because without a WhatsApp group, it does not exist. I just post like a couple of times a week a 2-minute insight, quick summary, a 2-minute insight into the prakim. And I will say it's a great way to go through Navi in a very manageable way. So we spoke about that in Parak Aleph of Sefer Yoshua is ultimately, again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu giving Yoshua chizuk. Again, this is the Chazak V'Amatz Parak. And there's something amazing that Hashem doesn't tell Yoshua. What doesn't he tell Yoshua? He never tells Yoshua, don't be scared. You'll be just like Moshe. You'll be as great as Moshe. He never tells him that. Why doesn't he tell him that? Why not? Because it's not true. Because lo kam b'Yisrael ki Moshe od. Sometimes when great people pass away, or when there's like a leadership vacuum, people make the mistake of thinking that the new leader has to fill the shoes of the old leader. And that's not the way it works. Every leader is different. Every person has a different koach, every person has a different temperament. And sometimes we make a very big mistake in trying to get new leadership to kind of mimic or to fill the shoes of the previous leader. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Moshe, those trumpets are yours because you were unique. There was never a Moshe before, and there will never be a Moshe afterwards. Moshe Rabbeinu was a unique personality, and amazingly enough, Hashem says to Yoshua, I don't want you to be like Moshe. That's not your job. That's not your job. Your job is not to be like Moshe. Your job is to be the best Yoshua. Rabbi say that's the pshat in the Chatzos. So the trumpets, which represented the leadership, the hold that Moshe Rabbeinu had over the people, that's not to be replicated. That was Moshe. The future is different. But Rabbi say, just understand also, it's not just a din in leadership. A lot of times in life, we undergo changes. Whether it's a change in relationship, a change in career, a change, whatever the change is. Sometimes when that change happens, we're so desperate to reclaim that which was. And many times in life, you cannot. When life shifts and puts you on a different derech, there's a new life to be forged and a new future to be forged, and you cannot get back what you once had. And people spend so much time trying to reclaim and recreate what was. And it's an exercise in futility. The same way Yoshua could not become a Moshe. No matter how much he would have tried, he could not become a Moshe Rabbeinu. His job was to forge a new derech. It's not just a din in leadership. It's a din in life. When life visits changes upon us, don't expend all the energy trying to reclaim and recreate what was. Sometimes you kind of just have to kind of bend your shoulder and pledge to yourself to create something beautiful from what is. Incredible. Let's go back there. Says the Gemara, Tani Papa Breid Rav Nachman, Kamed Rav Yosef. Menorah, Haisa Ba Mina Eshes. Mina Zav. So the menorah ultimately again had to come. Mina Eshes, again, Eshes is miksha, single block. Mina Zav, from gold. Good. Asa shel kesef kshera, both says incredible Gemara. Asa shel kesef kshera, shel bat, shel eber, shel gistron. What happens if you made the menorah out of other materials? Right? If you made it out of silver, so ultimately again the Mishnah said, the Gemara says, it's still good. Right? Still good. What if you made it out of bats? Bats is tin, aver is lead, gistron is some type of metallic combination, a blend. So what's the halacha? Rabbi Posel. Rabbi says it's possible. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda Makshir. Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's kosher. So Rabbi says it's incredible. Shal eitz, shal etzem, shal schuchis. What happens if you made it out of bone, out of glass, or out of wood? Divrei hakol pstula. Rabbi says, isn't that interesting? So again, gold, kosher. Silver, kosher. Other metals like tin, lead, metal combinations, machlokes Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef Yehuda. But again, wood, bone, glass, everyone agrees is possible. Amrle, my daitech. Said, what's your logic? Amrle, bein mar u bein mar, klali u prati darshi. So the truth is, we'll say, interestingly enough, everybody darshans, or everybody utilizes the same exegetical principles in arriving at their respective shitas. Mihu, Marsav, we're both listening to this. Marsav, one opinion holds, by the way, we're going to go through this. The Gemara goes a little bit out of order over here. Marsavar, ma prat mufurash shal matachas, just like the prat is metal, af kol shal matachas. So to any metal is usable for the menorah. Umar savar, ma prat mufurash davar chashav. The other opinion says, no, just like the prat is something that is chashav, af kol davar chashav. So to any important material, any chashav material can be used for the menorah. Amrlei, sami didach mikamei didi. You should really remove your opinion from in front of my opinion. Okay, so we'll say again, we'll see all of this. Here we go. This time we'll say, here it is. Let's make sense of that previous conversation. Kli sharis sha'ason shal eitz. If you made, now it's stomach kli sharis. Excuse me. You made a service utensil out of wood. Rebbe posel, Rabbi Yosef Yehuda machshir. Rebbe says that it's posel, and Rabbi Yehuda says that it's kosher. What are they arguing about? Here we go. Rebbe darish klali uprati. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda darish riboy umiuti. Machlokes in the application of exegetical principles. Here we go. The Rebbe darish klali uprati. So what's Rebbe's rush? Here we go. Vasisa menoras klal. So the pasuk says, "You shall make a menorah." That's a klal, a general statement. Then zahav tar. It says again pure gold. Prat. Remember again, what does prat mean? Prat is a specific statement. Okay. Miksha te'asa hamenorah. Then it says you shall make the menorah miksha chazar v'klal. So both say, see what we have over here? Klal, uprat, uklal. So again, asisa menorah, make a menorah. Klal, general statement. Zahav tar. Then it says gold, specific. And then it says miksha te'asa, make it miksha, another klal. Klal, uprat, uklal. What happens if you have a klal, uprat, uklal? I'atadan elakina prat. Both say first wide line. So remember, it is the prat that defines the klal. Maha prat mufurash shalmateches, avkol shalmateches. Just like the prat is metal, because gold is metal, so too, what does it teach you? Any type of metal is good, excuse me, for the menorah. Any type of metal is good for the menorah. So we'll say that is the position of Rebbe. So Rebbe holds again, halacha. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. So just like gold is metal, so too any type of metal is good for the menorah. We'll say enter the first wide line. Rabbi Yehuda darsh riboy umiute. Rabbi Yehuda darshins riboy umiut. Vasisa menoras riba. You shall go ahead and make a menorah. That's a riboy. We'll say riboy means comes to include other things. Zahav tahar. Then it says zahav tahar mi'et. It comes to exclude other things. Miksha te'asa. You shall make it miksha. Chazav v'riba. That's the second riboy. So we have riba, mi'et v'riba, riba hakol. So in general, Bosai, the way the exegetical principle of Bosai is the difference. When you have a klalu pratu klal, so the prat comes to define the parameters of the klal. When you have a riboy, a miut, and a riboy, that comes to include everything. So the Gemara says, Riba hakol, umay Rabbi, what does it come to include? Include Rabbi kol mili. It says any type of material is going to be useful for the menorah. Umay miet, but obviously everything can't meet everything. Something has to be excluded. Miet shalcheres. Interesting. It excludes earthenware. Right? So again, you can make a menorah out of any material you want, but it can't be earthenware. But I just want to point out, even according to the opinions that say that you can make a menorah out of anything, obviously, again, what's the goal over here? The ideal is gold. Right? Everyone is going to agree. And then again, once it's gold, that triggers all of the other gold obligations along with it. Adrabah. To which the Gemara says, why should just happen? You should remove your opinion from my opinion. To which the Gemara says, Ein lo zahav, maybe shal kasef. Sorry, mein lo zahav, maybe af shal kasef. So the Gemara says, shal nachoshes, shal barzel, shal bedil, shal ofaras. If a person doesn't have gold, so what can you do? You could use a different metal. You could use silver. You could use copper. You could use steel. You could use tin, and you could use lead. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda machshir af b'shel eitz. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says you can even use wood. You can even use wood. Tanya idach, another brayso says, lo ye'asa adam beis tavnis heichal. So let's listen to this. This is actually fascinating. You cannot go ahead and make your home in the model of the Beis HaMikdash. Can you imagine this? Let's say a person says, you know what? Baruch Hashem has got some shekel in the bank. I want to build myself a custom home, right? And who needs an indoor pool, or right, things like that? I'm going to build myself a Beis HaMikdash, right? I'm going to build myself literally a home that looks like the Beis HaMikdash. It sounds like such a beautiful idea, but you're not allowed to do it. You can't build your home in the model of the Beis HaMikdash. Achsadra kineged ulam. So again, you can't build yourself like an antechamber that looks like the ulam of the Beis HaMikdash. Chatzer kineged azara. You can't build for yourself a courtyard that looks like the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Shulchan kineged shulchan. You can't build yourself a dining room table that looks like the shulchan of the Beis Hamikdash. Or menorah kineged menorah. You can't build for yourself a menorah that looks like the menorah of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, interestingly enough, out of all of these cases, the most applicable one is which one? The menorah. So you can't build a menorah ultimately like the menorah of the Beis. So what can you do? Aval also shel chamisha v'shel shisha v'shel shmona v'shel shiva lo ye'aseh afilu mishar minei matachos. So you can make a 5-branched menorah, a 5-branch candelabra, 6, 8, but you can't make 7 even out of other metals. So by the way, you see from here that even out of other metals is problematic. Why? Because the menorah itself can be made out of other metals. Shabbos say, by the way, I just want to point out, it's interesting. So that's why some are makbid that on Hanukkah, not to call the menorah a menorah, but rather to call it a Chanukiah. Right, Chanukiah, depending on your miftah, right? A Chanukiah. Why? Because again, to call it a menorah, now obviously it's not the menorah, because what we kindle in our homes has 8 branches. The menorah in the Beis Hamikdash has 7 branches. But you see in Chazal, like there's this almost like insistence, do not recreate the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash outside of your own home. Shabbos say, now watch this. So therefore, again, the idea over here is that this is very important because what the Gemara is clearly opening our eyes up to is this concept, excuse me, this concept that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and create a menorah out of other materials. So here's, just to appreciate what's happening over. We're going to go on in just a second. Everyone is agreeing that bidi evident menorah can be made out of other materials. The shaila just is, how far do you go? So in this first school of thought is, you can build a menorah out of other materials as long as they're in the metal family. Okay, so again, you have silver. So again, the interesting part is also going to be, is there a hierarchy? Like, do we say once you're not using gold, all metals are equal? Or no, again, once you don't use gold, then it's silver. Maybe after silver, it's copper, and then does it work its way down? So just keep in mind all of this. But now watch this. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Af shel eitz lo ye'aseh. Now watch this. Now again, I will say, I want to point out over here, the conversation that we are having is different than the conversation we were having. Beforehand, we were talking about what the menorah should be made from or what it could be made from. That's not this discussion. This discussion over here is about the prohibition to create utensils in your home that look like the utensils of the Beis Hamikdash. So the Mishnah said, you can't build a house that has the dimensions of the antechamber of the Beis Hamikdash. You cannot create a dining room table that looks like the shulchan, and you can't create a menorah that looks like the menorah. What can you do? You could create a candelabra that has 5 branches, 8 branches, 10 branches, 27 branches, just not 7 branches, even if it's made out of other metal. Now again, Rabbi Yehuda says, Af shel eitz lo ye'aseh. You can't even make a wooden menorah in your home that has 7 branches. Why? But one second, who said that wood is good for menorah? Watch this. Say this, by the way, is one of the most incredible gemaras. Kederech sha'asu malchei beis chashmonai. So Rabbi say, why? Because if you make a menorah out of wood, that will resemble the menorah of the Chashmonaim in the Hanukkah story. Rabbi say, hold on to your seats. Watch this. Amru lo misham raya. You're bringing a raya from the Chashmonaim, from the Maccabim. Listen to this. Shipudim shal barzel hayu. They made their menorah out of literally again steel poles, which bepashtus means they're spears. The chipum bebatz. Later on, they coated it with tin, Shiru. When they got a little bit more money later on down the road, asah and shal kasef, they were able to make a menorah out of silver. Chazru ve'shiru. When they had a little bit more money, asom shel zahav. Then they finally made a menorah out of gold. So we'll say this. By the way, we saw this Gemara actually before this. The Gemara also appears in Masechah Shabbos. Right? Where's that? Hey. Yeah, Shabbos. So we'll say, so again, we have to unpack this because this is absolutely incredible. Let's take a step back. So first of all, again, just to understand, let's keep on topic over here. So remember, Rabbi Yossi is coming along and saying, by the way, not only can you not make a 7-branch candelabra, a 7-branch menorah out of gold or any other metal. You can't even make it out of wood. You can't make it out of wood because apparently because there was also some time a wood menorah. So we'll say, what is happening over here? So just understand, this opens up a ridiculously new vista in the Hanukkah story. Because we always assume that the biggest thing missing when the Chashmonaim came to the Beis HaMikdash was oil. That's the Gemara says, right? They looked for oil. They couldn't find any oil. By the way, there was also something else that was missing. What else was missing? The menorah. We'll say, which makes perfect sense. The menorah was made out of solid gold. So of course, the Syrian Greeks are not leaving that scene there. They pillaged everything. So of course they want to take that. There was no menorah. So we'll say, so when the Chashmonaim, when the Maccabim came into the Beis HaMikdash, not only did they see it defiled, not only did they see it in a total state of just run down kite, right? A total dereliction. But literally again, there was no oil. There was no menorah. So what did they do? Rabbi say, can you imagine what they did? They took the spears, the very instruments through which they won this war with Siyat Yishmael on behalf of Klal Yisrael, and they took those instruments of war, coated them with tin, and ultimately again went ahead and they Rabbi say, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. It's Tumah. It's Tumah. What's the answer? Tumah Hutcha B'tzibor. Everybody was Tameh. It was war. It was war. Everybody and everything was Tameh, and Tumah Hutcha B'tzibor. Shabbos say they went ahead and literally they took the very instruments of war, coated it with tin, and that's what they used ultimately again to make the menorah, which Shabbos say highlights the Iker message of Hanukkah in an even more dramatic way. Life is all about taking what you have and creating light with it. So often, when we don't have our optimal circumstances, we're like, I can't do it. I can't do it, right? I don't have all the tools that I need. I need this, I need that. In order to be accomplished, I need this, I need that. I need a southeast wind at 5 knots an hour, right there. I need everything, atmospheric, barometric, universal conditions to be perfect in order for me to accomplish. And generally, when people need the perfect conditions for accomplishment, what do they end up accomplishing? Zero. Because if you're going to wait for the perfect circumstances in order to accomplish, the perfect circumstances never have. Life is all about taking the circumstances you have and make light. Make something great. Create something absolutely unequivocally amazing with what you have. But what happens if you have nothing? What happens if you have nothing? What's the answer? Find something. You have nothing. You have no menorah. You have no oil. Find something. Just find something. Take what you got. Take what you got. If it means taking your spears and covering them with tin and figuring out what to do, take what you got and make something happen. And the boss say, incredible. There's one more mussar from this, which is, if you notice, by the way, the Gemara is very interesting. The Gemara says, first year they coated it, or sounds like first year they covered it with tin. Shiru, they became wealthier. Then they had silver. Chazar, they became a little wealthier. Then they had gold. They will say, what's the timeline on this? What's the timeline? So the Pashtos, we don't know. But one thing is clear. When the Gemara goes out of its way to use the lashon of chazru, chazru means there was some amount of time that elapsed. Change takes time. Improvement takes time. We become so frustrated when things kind of don't drop into place immediately, and we forget that the more dramatic the undertaking, generally the more time it is going to take. The challenge in life is not to lose hope over time, and to recognize that as long as, remember, they were still lighting the menorah every day. Keep pushing forward, keep doing, keep kindling, keep accomplishing, and one day somehow the pieces do drop into place. Because at some point in time in the future, Chazru be'ashira asam shel zav, the gold came, the menorah finally was as it was supposed to be. But the point that the Gemara is making over here for our is Rabbi Yossi says, you see from here that even wood apparently again was a usable material for the menorah. So we'll say we are going to stop over here for today. Tomorrow coming attractions. And Eretz Hashem, we're going to go through the actual structure of the menorah itself in Eretz Hashem. And again, we're going to find out the halacha l'maisa. We need the halacha l'maisa ultimately again on what could the menorah be made of. Bottom line, what can it be made of? And when making it from a material other than gold, what happens to all of the other details regarding the menorah? a ridiculously amazing start to the week. I'm pretty sure Mashiach's coming this week. With a daf like this on a Sunday, who knows what ridiculous bracha awaits us all? Yeah, and by the way, I will say, just if you ever wondered where the name Super Sunday comes from, what is that identity rooted in? Ein Super Sunday Gedola Mizo. Let me just take this off. So, our read by definition comes to